Good evening. Welcome you all to the 41 lecture in the Democracy Dialogue series organized by New Socialist Initiative. We are extremely happy that Mr. Arun Maira, author, thinker, former member of the Planning Commission, kindly agreed to deliver lecture in this series this evening. The theme of his presentation is a strategy for India's tryst with destiny, where he would be basically summarizing the ideas which are at the center of his latest book titled Reimagining India's Economy, The Road to a More Equitable Society. Here are a few more details about our speaker. Mr. Arun Maira is an eminent author, a strategic thinker, and a former member of the Planning Commission of India. Uh, he joined the commission at the invitation of the then Prime Minister of India, Dr. Manmohan Singh. Mr. Maira has had a distinguished career as an enlightened business leader and management consultant. He worked as an executive director on the board of Tata Motors, and later as chairman of the Boston Consultancy Group. He has authored many books, including Transforming Systems, Why the World Needs an Ethical Toolkit, Transforming Capitalism, Improving the World for Everyone, Redesigning the Airplane While Flying, Reforming Institutions, and the next book, Shaping the Future, A Guide for System Leaders. We thank Mr. Arun Maira once again that he is here to share his views on a strategy for India's tryst with destiny. Friends, please welcome Mr. Arun Maira.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Subhashi. Thank you very much, Ravi and Subhashi, for inviting me to share my thoughts on the future of India, and more specifically about what should be our strategy to meet the tryst with destiny that we set out on towards in 1947, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru's world-famous speech at that midnight hour in 1947. The journey to our tryst with destiny. I'm going to begin with the dialogue between Mahatma Gandhi and Rabindranath Tagore, their dialogue on the future of the world and India. Some words from both of them. Gandhiji was a practitioner of social change. He had a vision of a self-reliant country open to the world. And his famous metaphor of in his room, keeping all the windows open and letting the winds blow in from all sides without being shaken off his own feet. That was his image of India, a country confident of itself, open to learning and ideas from everywhere, but not losing its way, not being swept off its feet by a wind from any side. And Tagore, the philosopher and poet, whose novel The Home and the World was about the futility of actively contesting an established power. Tagore, in his Nobel Prize-winning poem Gitanjali, dreamt of a world with good values. I just pick up some lines from that poem, where the mind is without fear and every head is held high, which was a vision of Purna Swaraj, every citizen having equal freedoms in political, social, and economic spheres and living with dignity, heads held high. Another line, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, a vision of the governance of a system, not broken up into parts, into narrow parts by walls amongst them. And the third line, where knowledge is free. And this leads me to, which I'll come to later, about the science of economics and the colonialization of the ideas of the world. Knowledge is not free in the world today. My discussion is in two parts. The first part is about the world, and the second part is about India in the world. Now, in the first part about the world, I want to paint 5 broad brush pictures into the world, about the world, through 5 perspectives. The first is a picture of a perfect storm. The second, an image of an earthquake. The third is a view of the world through the caste system. The fourth is the force of colonial economics and globalization. And the fifth, finally, is the world as a system. So 5. So let's take the first one, the perfect storm. This, I borrowed this phrase from the title of the book by Sebastian Junger, who wrote it in 1997. It was made into a very powerful movie also. It is a story of a fishing boat captain in Gloucester, in the northeastern United States, who goes out in the winter like other fishing boats go to catch codfish in the North Atlantic. And that's a very stormy time in that part of the world at that time of the year. And his ship encounters a very unusual storm system. Normally in the North Atlantic, you get a storm from one side, quite often another one from the other side, and it's even more stormy. But in this case, 3 storm systems converge together where his ship was. And his vessel, which was the best and most robust shipping vessel in Gloucester, could not withstand this unusual perfect storm. And neither did he, as the most seasoned captain, have the skills to navigate through it. Today, the world is being buffeted by storms, forces from 4 directions, not just 3. So it's a more than perfect storm. From the right, we've got the force of property rights. The world should be organized with property rights and around property rights. On the left, the force coming in, the wind sweeping in, is about human rights. But human rights must prevail. Left and right, there's this contrast between, on one side, with the property rights about a way of living of having and having more, and on the other side, with the human rights, a way of living of being. And this is Eric Fromm's book, very famous. Is contrasting between the 2 modes of living, the mode of having and the mode of being. Above these 2 forces, which are clashing with each other, is the force rising in the later part of the last millennium, the force of the globalization of information and finance, which is enabling people everywhere connect with and see things anywhere and everywhere. Beneath, from underneath, is coming a voice from the earth. It is training and is speaking up now and saying, enough is enough of what you are doing, you human beings, on the earth. Enough is enough. I won't take the strain anymore. And through this perfect storm, 2 voices are being clearly heard. One of them is saying, this is not fair. Whatever is going on is not fair. And the other is saying, with the earth combining in it, this is not sustainable. But there are 2 opposing principles for institutional design that are clashing from the right and from the left. From the right is the principle, like I mentioned before, about property rights, and every person has a right to own and to defend what they own and to do what they wish like to do with what they own, which includes, of course, their own body and their own identity. And on the other side is the principle around human rights, that every human being has an equal right to live with dignity, whether he or she owns anything or not. So there are 2 conflicting versions of democracy that are prevailing through the force of capitalism and through the force of, let me say, democracy, human democracy. In capitalist decision-making, the democracy is that your decision rights are proportional to what you own. And therefore, in any company, a joint stock company, your rights in the decisions are proportional to how much of the company's stock that you own. If you own $1 million worth of shares in the company, you have $1 million worth of votes. And if you own $10 worth of shares, you have only $10 worth of votes. But whereas in a genuine political democracy, whether you own zero or you own a billion, you have an equal say, an equal vote in how the system, the society should be governed. And this is the heart of the problem that we are having in the conduct of our human affairs today. Which of these principles should apply to design a system which is good for everybody and sustainable? The second image is the earthquake, an earthquake. An earthquake arises when the tectonic plates within the earth, they grate against each other and the strain becomes too much and you get eruptions. There are three tectonic plates that are now grating in the earth, three of them. In the middle are sovereign countries within their boundaries. Now, these sovereign countries within legal boundaries, it's a convention established that that's the right unit for governance of a socio-political system arising from the Westphalian Agreement to sort of end wars within Europe, which of course haven't ended. But every country within its boundaries has a right to choose its own government, to conduct its affairs in its own ways, and no one else should interfere with it. And the United Nations Charter is founded on that principle. Of all member countries have a right to do what they wish to for the sake of their own people within their geographical political boundaries. Above this plate is now this very fast moving, fast shifting fluid plate of information and finance flows flowing freely across national boundaries, and it's uncontrollable by national governments. And beneath the plate of national governments, deeper down, are communities of identity that cross national boundaries. These boundaries created at some time in history by some agreements that this shall be the boundary within which some people are sovereign, and on the side of it, other people are sovereign. And we've seen the conflicts that are continuing to arise because the boundaries of sovereign nations, whether it's Ukraine vis-a-vis Russia, or Pakistan vis-a-vis India, or where communities like the Kurds spill across the boundaries of several other sovereign nations. And these are the sources of great conflict, which governments are finding very hard to manage. So they are squeezed with these flows of finance on top, which say, well, we've got more right to move around than you have to control us. And beneath that, people who cross the boundaries of their identities cross the boundaries of the nations. So the grating between these three plates is creating the problem that we are confronting today. Thomas Friedman, the famous author, the guru of hyperglobalization in the book that he wrote, The World is Flat, said that this flow of finance and money and trade information freely across national boundaries is going to make the world one. We're all going to feel like we're all together and we all got the same destiny. But he had also written a book, a much better book, Thomas Friedman, called The Lexus and the Olive Tree, about the conflicts in the Middle East, in which he had the same thesis, though. He said the force of the Lexus, which was like at that time the best car designed by the Japanese, the luxury car, that brand was sweeping, and everybody would want to have a Lexus, and so everyone would feel that we want the same things. But he said the force of the olive tree, its roots go very deep, and it's not easily shaken by this force which is shaking its branches on the top. The olive tree will stay rooted. And this was a metaphor, of course, in the Middle East, olive trees in these different countries. So that's the image of the earthquake with the three layers grating there. The third is the caste system as a view of the governance of societies all over the world and through history. In the Indian caste system, we have three sources of power: knowledge power, the Brahmins, let me say the muscle power with the Kshatriyas who rule and defend. Then we have money power, which is with the Vaishnavas and the merchant class. Now, in our system, of course, till recently, it was the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas who were the respected more than the merchants, the Vaishnavas. But beneath all these three, with their sources of power, money power, knowledge power, and muscle power, are the people who have to work with their own bodies and earn labor, powerless people, divided into many different labor professions, dirty ones, clean ones, that's it. Four castes. Thomas Piketty, who's done some of the most remarkable research into inequality and the sources of inequality in the world, has described that within Europe too, there have been, through the Middle Ages and before, and even recently, three castes. The church, Brahmins, if you will, the kings, the muscle power defenders, and financiers who gave money to the kings and to the church to help them to sort of sort out things amongst themselves, fight their wars. And they've been always there also, the serfs, the workers, everywhere. Now, the change that has happened in the last century, especially in the later part of the century, that financing and lending of money, which was always a profession, but not the most respected profession, whether in Europe, we remember Shylock the Jew and Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice, or here, not the most respected, has now become the most respected profession. And they exercise, the financiers and lenders of money, investors of money, are exercising great power, not just behind the scenes, but very visibly, and we respect them for doing it. This is the big shift. It's the rise of money power, the respectability of money power, the celebration of money power, with the further emissarization of pure labor power. In the late 20th century, hyperglobalization after 1990 with technology owned by financial capital, there's a further marginalization of labor and human beings, and of course, artificial intelligences, making it seem as if human beings won't be necessary. So we come to the fourth picture, which is colonial economics and globalization. Economics is the science of money. The worth of everything in economics is measured in the currency of money. And it has to be some common currency so that it can be put into a mathematical model. And in therefore economics and economic policy, money is the ultimate source of power. He who owns the money controls the price. The produce of the farmer, the price is determined by the person who buys, who can withhold payment, because money can be safely in a vault. The farmer's produce will rot if it's not paid in time. Similarly, the worker, he consumes his body in the day and he must be paid at the end of the day because what he's done that day is gone. And if the person who has to pay him says, not today, well, he can keep his money safe, it's not decaying. I'll pay you another day. The human being has lost a part of his life. Now, money also controls knowledge systems today. It's apparently a good thing that you have intellectual property that should be belonging to somebody so they can use that intellectual property smartly for the sake of improving, ostensibly, the lives of others. But of course, it helps to improve your own profits because you own it and get a return on it. It's legal. Now, it was not okay previously, but now it's become okay. It is believed to be the way it should be to run an economic system efficiently. Colonialism is the grabbing of sources of wealth with muscle power. First, it used to be only or mostly land and natural resources. Who had the more armies or ships would go and grab the land in other places and, use that land for their own purposes, for their own economic good. The second was then grabbing human labor, slaves, indentured workers, because you need human effort to get the value out of the land, either by farming or by taking off the trees and cutting them and weaving. You need the human labor to add value to whatever the land can produce and gives. So then the owning of human labor, first directly as your property as slaves, or as I mentioned before, controlling the value of human labor by withholding your money till you are willing to pay the reduced price at which the poor person, the farmer or the worker, is now in desperation ready to sell to you. The third now, as I said, the big shift in the last century, later part of century, is the ownership of knowledge also. So we've got land and natural resources, human beings, and now knowledge also. And the formation of the WTO in 1990, that's been its biggest thrust. International agreements to manage knowledge ownership and knowledge trading. So I come now to the post-1991 period about how colonialism is still carrying on and gone even deeper. Post-1991 was declared by Fukuyama as being the period of the end of history with the final victory of capitalism over socialism. And I'm very pleased to be invited by this group, which I notice it's Democracy Dialogues, but also it's the New Socialism Initiative, and I hope I got the title right. Yes, so the clash between the socialism, which was considered a bad thing, and it was conflated with communism, and what from Washington came this big force that it must be raw, naked capitalism. And that was Fukuyama's view that it's the end of ideological history. Capitalism has won. The WTO, which was, as I said, an instrument of this Washington capitalism thrust, told countries like our country, India, you must abandon industrial policy, which we used to have, industrial policy to build our own industries and our own depth. You must abandon this. This is a bad idea. It's a socialist idea. It's a protectionist idea. You must join free trade, rule-based free trade, where the rules are, of course, determined by the powerful countries. And today, central banks control the price of money in every country, because in economics, the shift also became to monetarism to ensure the price of money is kept secure. Well, of course, for citizens too, but mostly for those who are investors, they want to be sure that the money that they've stored, when they need it, it will be the same value and will not have depreciated. So monetarism and central banks, the evil has become when the United States determined that it will not honor something which was universally the same value, gold, and use its own currency as the currency in which it will pay off its debts. That's the dollar. So here we have the situation where the control of even the value of the money, which should be sort of a neutrally determined for the sake of free trade, fair trade, is controlled again, I'm saying from Washington. And Western corporations and Western universities are controlling the ideas of the world, because the principle of he who pays the piper will call the tune. He who pays the piper will call the tune. Globalization, as I just said, has been an expansion of colonialism in this century with new financial and IP weapons. There's a freedom for money capital to cross national boundaries, and there are curbs on human beings crossing national boundaries to look for a better world with more freedom. The fifth image is the world as a complex, self-adaptive system. The world is suffering from many problems, and we call it a polycrisis: environmental problems, social problems, economic problems, and yes, political inequality problems. And these are captured in 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which all the nations have signed up to. The 17 of them, they cover all these aspects, different aspects of the environment, of the economy, and of inequality in a society. Now, each of these problems, whether it's the problem of environment, exists in every country, but in different forms. The problems of inequality exist in every country in different forms. The problems of economy exist in every country, but in different forms. So if we say that, let's say there are 17 problems and all 17 should be existing in every little corner of the world, in Kerala, in Bangladesh, in Kashmir, in middle of Africa, in Colorado, you'll say, but not entirely. Some of those in the SDGs are related to oceans. I said, all right, it's some like that. You can say some may not apply everywhere. But if I said at least 7 of these sort of universal problems will apply everywhere. So since we are physicists and mathematicians here too, if I took 7 out of a set of 17 and said, how many combinations can there be of these? It's 94 million. So in other words, the SDG situation, the complex SDG problem exists in 90 million different forms in different parts of the world. You cannot have a one size, one type solution fit everywhere. Neither a one size climate solution, nor a one size economic solution, or a one size social form design solution. The society, the economy, the environment everywhere is a system, and it must take its unique shape in its context and change in its stage of history from where it is to where it wants to go. So every locality has to be governing itself as a complex and self-adaptive system. The present SDGs, the forecasts say that if we keep carrying on trying to solve the SDGs with the very scientific ways that we're trying to do, we should have achieved the SDGs, or will achieve, or should have achieved by 2030. We will achieve them at the rate at which we're going by 1987. I mean, sorry, 2087, by which time, I don't know, the climate side or the political side, the world will blow up. So as Einstein said, we all physicists, some of us here, that if you continue to try and solve a very intractable problem with the very way of thinking and organizing that has led to the problem, you're mad. So we got to step out, and I'm saying this so-called scientific way of breaking problems into parts and then getting specialists to look into parts and find a scientific solution for that part of the problem, of a universal problem, which is good in physics perhaps, is not the appropriate way to solve a complex socio-economic, political, environmental problem. So we need a new way, a systems way of learning how to find solutions, complex self-adaptive solutions by communities everywhere in their places in the world. Okay, so I could talk further on this subject because this is to us, like me as a physicist originally and now a philosopher perhaps and a system scientist, the key to find a new way of governing the world which will be good for everybody and will be sustainable. But I won't go too far into that, but to say only one aspect about organization. Aldous Huxley, who wrote the book, The Brave New World, I think gave the greatest insight as a philosopher onto what is the key problem that is going to be besetting human beings and the governance of the world. He said, breaking up a production system into its components and then making every component efficient in doing what it does. The assembly line, he called it Fordism. This way of organizing to get more efficiency with less resources and more scale is being applied, as he pointed out, in the Soviet Union and in the United States. And he says not a conflict between socialism and communism, it's this way of organizing a machine into its parts and making each part perform most efficiently is the problem. It should be organized. The world should be organized as an organic system and not as a machine-like system. So he called it Fordism. And Gandhiji had the same problem. He said, I don't like communism and I don't like capitalism for the same reason that we do say that in communism, the factory is not owned by a capitalist, that the factory is owned by the people, the state. The people don't have any say, the workers, in what is to be done in the factory or how the profit of the factory has to be used. They're decided by, again, someone above them, away from them, just as in a capitalist system. So the worker has no control over his or own life and what he should do with what he can produce. So I've introduced these 5 ideas to you, and I now going to move very quickly into part 2, which is about India in this world. They say East is East and the West is West, and the two shall never meet, but they meet in India, and they are right now meeting and conflicting in India. India is at a major fault line in geopolitics. India was bullied by the Western global hegemon in 1991 to follow its way, the Washington way. And we've got the Eastern contender to that hegemon, that's China, straddling India's borders. Some years ago, when I was in the Planning Commission at a special meeting convened of the National Security Advisory Council, our ambassador to China had requested that special meeting. He was Jai Shankar, who's presently our foreign minister. And he began the meeting by telling us, he said, gentlemen, do you realize that India has become a colony of China? Now, he was speaking to a crowd of Indian economists and policymakers, all of whom are very wedded to the Western views. And to them, China is a bad thing. So then to be told that we're now a colony of China, he said, well, look, your biggest trades are with the United States and with China. It's as large with China. To China, you sell very little and buy a lot. But it's the content of what you sell and the content of what you buy which makes you in a colonial relationship. They are selling you manufactured goods and high-value technology goods. With the United States, yes, you are got a surplus, export surplus to them. But it's your relationship with China you got to rethink, and it's for the sake of your own country. Unless you build more in your own country, in our own country, we will not have the strategic independence that we need to have from both the USA and from China and from everybody. So where did we lose our way? India, 1947, our tryst with destiny. Nehruji, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, had on his desk, till he died, it was there, the poem of Robert Frost, my favorite poet, which said, the roads are lovely, dark and deep, but we have miles to go before we sleep. Well, miles to go before we sleep to reach our tryst with destiny, which is Purna Swaraj, equal freedom for all citizens, regardless of their religion or caste, or whether they are poor or rich. India right now is becoming one of the most unequal societies in the world, a country in which certainly the minority religion is not secure, a country in which the worker class, the castes, lower castes, are finding they're left out. People don't even know how many of them are actually employed and if they're employed with what sort of security in their employment. This is the state we've come to. We're becoming a less equitable, less fair as a society than we were before. The rich are becoming richer much faster than the poor are becoming less poor. One religion is superior to all others, and lower castes are still way behind. The growth of incomes in the lower half of the pyramid is insufficient to boost consumption and investments, and it's insufficient for the creation of good jobs for youth. So this is why, no matter what incentives you give our capitalists, so demand of them, like right now our ministers are are doing, please, why don't you? Even Indian investors, capitalists, invest more to build more capacity here. They don't do it because there's no demand, sufficient demand to recover their investments from. Demand in this country. Why is there no demand in this country or insufficient? Because the wages are not rising in this country at the bottom. So the solution to have a sustainable and growing economy is to lift incomes at the bottom first to enable the investments to then be productive and more to come, and a virtual cycle will start. This theory of first grow the top and the trickle down will come has not worked anywhere. It has worked for the very rich, and they will keep justifying it and say, no, please don't tax us anymore, otherwise we won't be, having any incentive to invest to you any further. So we get frightened of that power. But if we change our economic model, we'll say, actually, there is no power there. The power is here. And let's use this power to build the depth of the economy along with good lives for our own people. India is the most environmentally stressed large country in the world. It's the most freshwater stressed country in the world. It has the most polluted cities in the world. It's destroying its mountain environment so rapidly. And along with, of course, lives being lost, but more than that, even our ecological disasters, which are boding very ill for the economic and ecological security of our country. India, a country with 1.2 billion humans, the largest population in the world, has failed to become an engine of the growth of the world, unlike China, a similar sized country. Both were very poor in the last century, into the 1980s. Both have become less poor, but China's 5 times richer and much more self-reliant. And so what does this say about ideologies? We took 2 wrong turns in the road after independence. The first was just after independence. We adopted the Nehruvian Western modern path to industrialization rather than the Gandhian path to strengthen local economic and social systems and building the foundations of a strong economy and society locally. A bottom-up growth model rather than a top-down, trickle-down model. The second wrong turn we took was in 1991 with the so-called end of history, the supposed end of socialism with the final victory of capitalism. China and India took different paths. China was not bullied. India gave up its mission to be self-reliant and joined the Western economic consensus. India and China were comparable in the 1980s. India was a little ahead. From the 1980s onwards, late 1980s onwards, India's economic policies were taken over by economists trained in the World Bank and IMF and by US universities and their ideas about trade and capitalism. China took its own path, feeling the stones under its own feet. As Danny Roderick, the famous Harvard economist, says, no one can name a Western economist or piece of research that played an instrumental role in China's economic reforms. China has remained socialist in its orientation. Now China is so far ahead of India in economic heft, incomes levels, industrial and technological heft that even the US is worried. This is the return of history. And we have to think, which is the better path to build a more equitable and self-reliant economy? US-style capitalism or democratic socialism? And more importantly, what must be India's own firm path to go from where it is now? We can't imitate even China. We should not. It's somewhere else. It's got a different context. Our own path to our own tryst with destiny, whether we want to call it capitalist or socialist. I'm going to end with 6 principles which should form the architecture for our path to meet our tryst with destiny. First is in the governance, bottom up and local. The second is make in India for India. The third is nature, society, and the economy must grow together. And the economy presently, the concept of how economy should be managed is damaging natural and social systems. We have to change this. The economy, society, and nature must nurture each other and grow together. We must measure the quality and the depth of growth rather than the size of the growth. We need more system science rather than specialized sciences of the components. The economists have got their own sciences, the environmentalists have got their own scientific sciences, and the sociologists have got their own science. All of them in their compartments, using their own jargon. They don't like each other and don't understand each other and don't want to even listen to each other. Let's step back and think of the whole together. And for the sake, therefore, of understanding complex systems, as also for the sake of a democracy of diverse people on a journey together towards a shared future, we need more listening to people not like us. Much more listening. Shut off our smartphones, shut off the tweets, just listen to someone not like yourself, someone that you would be ignoring otherwise कि हमारे जैसे नहीं है और जानते नहीं हम उनको I'm speaking Hindi हम पसंद नहीं करेंगे पसंद कर नहीं सकते हैं and they feel the same about you because you're not listening to each other across these walls. As Gurudev Tagore said, we've created these narrow domestic walls and the world has got divided. India is divided. Simple. Just meet your neighbor. Maybe different to you, but listen. आप कौन है? आप क्या चाहते हैं? Maybe you'll find that we all want basically the same things, and together we can be on this caravan and on this journey together. So I'm going to stop here. Raviji, as you said, less than 1 hour, 45 minutes or less. And I'd love questions, comments.
Thank you very much, sir, for this thought-provoking presentation, underlining the ills of our society and where we have lost our way. All those many interesting things you have said, which many of us would like to know more about it, and also must have questions. But before I invite other friends to raise their questions and comments, I will request Ravi, my friend and comrade for the last 40 years, to raise some questions. Ravi, please.
Thank you, Subhash, and thank you, Arun Sahab, again for accepting our invitation. It was such a thoughtful, insightful lecture, and yeah, I mean, I might just say to our audience that, I just read Arun Sahab's book, and immediately wrote to him, that, we would like to have him as our speaker, and we are so glad that he agreed. Well, the things that the 6 points that you have suggested at the end, I 100% agree with them. But let me take, and I'm sure there will be lots of questions from our audience. Let me take start the discussion with something that was implicit in your lecture, but it was not the explicit topic of today, which is whatever strategy you are suggesting or whatever strategy one comes up with, how does one start about implementing that in today's India? One specific curiosity I have, and I would like to have your opinion on that, is that we have this intensely competitive electoral democracy. Of course, earlier there was Congress hegemony, now there is Hindutva hegemony, but still the democracy is intensely competitive. And if you look at the world, I see that Western style, these multi-party based competitive democracies, sometimes I feel are bringing out not the best from the respective societies, especially in a country like India. It does not bring out the best from our society. And what we need for any strategy, I mean, I like to say that we need a strong state against capital for, you know, in its relationship with powerful part of the economy and polity. And we need a very weak state for the citizen to, you know, so that it does not impinge on or curtail the human rights and civic rights of citizens. But we have seen that in this competitive electoral democracy have ended up giving rise to autocracies, authoritarianism, majoritarianism. Supposedly, you know, people have consented for that, you know. China has a different system, and West like to say that China is not democratic, you know, that is another debate. But China has managed to both the things. It is a strong state that controls capital, controls, you know, keeps economy under control or under planning. And contrary to what people believe in West, you know, I think it has a legitimacy. The state has legitimacy given by its people. People are quite satisfied and happy. So we have this problem that, I mean, people say democracy is the least bad system you can have. But in our case, when democracy has become intense and competitive, it has given rise to Hindutva majoritarianism. There seems to be a conflict and or contradiction there. So while I agree with your, you know, strategy part, how does one go about, you know, how does one start and get, you know, try to manage these negative features of the least bad system that one has, namely democracy, which is itself giving rise to majoritarianism and authoritarianism?
You know, Ravi, you use the word democracy, and of course, you're pointing to the multi-party electoral system. It's only one way to exercise democratic governance. But that one way of multi-party electoral democracy has become sort of the way in which you're supposed to be democratic. And so, yes, at the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union and Francis Fukuyama's victory of ideologies, it was one was about, you know, capitalism vis-a-vis communism in terms of the way of running an economy. The other was multi-party democratic democracies. And of course, China, because as you said, it's a single party democracy, I'm going to call it. That's not the way we can have real democracy. We need to have contention, public contention between more than one party. Now, the fact of the matter is the United States itself is so stuck with its two-party democratic system, they can't take any decision which is in the interest of the safety of all the people. Gun control is just one example. And on the issue of free speech, it gets tangled. Because yes, if you have elections, then a person who's going to seek votes must be able to reach out to people to communicate with them. And to reach out to people and communicate with them, you need money to hire old time, maybe a truck to take you around with a loudspeaker and set up some hustings. And in today's world, it's much more than that and much quicker. You got to be able to, you know, marshal media, the social media, and so on. It takes a lot of money to fight an election. It's just in the design of the system, and you got these two principles, both of which are good. The elected people must communicate with those who they represent, and there must be freedom for them to hear and to say. And if you then come to saying that money, that my point I made earlier, also has a right to be free. And so in the US, in the decision taken about the common citizens, that you know, the curbs on the use of money for promoting a public cause, which could be a very political cause, has been taken away by the Supreme Court of the United States. So US public opinion is shaped by large amounts of money by those who have the money. Have the money. So if you come to, I'm coming down to the design of, once again, the electoral political party system. By the way, Václav Havel, who led the People's Revolution, non-violent in Czechoslovakia against the Soviets, and he became, as you know, the president there. And when he tried to govern that country, which is now by electoral democracy, multi-party, he said, can't we have politics without politicians? We should have philosophers in politics and not politicians. But what do you need politicians for? We do need politicians because the politician's job is to, connect with people, to uh, try and sway people's opinions towards what the politician feels, that political party feels, their version of the future. It's a vision they have, and they want to sway people to go that way. So if you also say competing visions must be allowed to prevail, and you have the political party system as a way of determining which way the people want to go, then the party that is able to marshal more money will, well, rule the day. Okay? At the foundation of the UN, I'm going to take a little while dwelling on this because this is the heart of today's problem of the governance of the world. Okay? Because every country, whether it's Europe or France or Poland or the United States, like I mentioned, and certainly our country also, now, any country which is a multi-party democracy is struggling with the emergence of a majoritarianism within their countries. Different versions of populism and majoritarianism. Why is this so? Because people everywhere are upset with the multi-party democracy system. They say it really doesn't govern well. People have got their own interest to get elected. And yes, they need to get elected. Otherwise, they can't be the people who can have the policies for us. So the politician has a good justification. I must fight to get elected. Otherwise, I can't do good for you. So please vote for me. Because I are the person that will do the best for you. But if none of them are really able to together, and they must be together, because there are many points of view, even in what people represent. So up at the upper level, the conversations between different points of view within the society and different needs of the society must happen in a way that many points of view can be considered equally, not in a debating fashion that my view is better than yours, and certainly not by saying more people agree with me than with you, so therefore my view should prevail, which we believe actually is a very simple and logical principle of decision making. If it is the majority's view, well, too bad for the minority. They would have to, because the majority likes it. So there's a design flaw in this. And so what is the solution? I'm saying just get out of this. And here I'm going to quote again, first-year economist Kenneth Arrow, who pointed out that no electoral system, it's his impossibility theorem, that no electoral system by, multi-choices of things, can you ever find out, by the result of that, what people feel about one issue. Because in their decisions, they're taking their feelings about many issues in what they choose for their representative, and so on, it goes up. It goes up like that. So if you really want to know what all the people think, and if they want to know what each other think, it has to be a conversation amongst them. It has to be a conversation amongst them, not debates in the parliament amongst those who were elected by them to sort out on behalf of the whole. So it is possible. People said that now with the social media, people can, reach out and talk to people in other countries or people in other parties and so on. Actually, that's made it much worse because our attention spans are limited. And so we will choose out of the billions of things that bombard us every week, the few that I will pay attention to. And of course, now the algorithms of the social media will know what I like and give me more of what I like and more with people that I like. So it's hardening the boundaries amongst ourselves. So stop conversations through social media and get to conversations amongst real people, diverse people, and not after they're elected, because then they must represent the people who elected them truthfully. Because if in the parliament a person were, after listening to many other points of view, agree with the minority party, agrees with the majority or vice versa, his own party will throw him out. And the people will say, we never elected you to take that side. But he says, no, on this complex issue, that is the right way to think about it. So the solution is, as people have been proposing for some time in deliberative democracy, that there's a missing middle layer. So what are the three layers here? The first is this on top. We have a constitutionally empowered system to decide on behalf of everybody, which are elected people, like the Congress of the United States, which also Supreme Court of US says, we can't decide. It's the people represented in the Congress, they must decide what they feel like doing about whether it's abortion or about the gun laws, and we can't take that decision. It's, constitutionally, it's their right to represent the people and to decide on behalf of the people to do that. So these people are now stuck. One, they're stuck because the system divides them to say, you better vote with the whip on this side or that side. Other is, there's so much information being thrown up at them, so many issues. Social media has opened up the public system. It's a good thing. We can hear many things, but it confuses the heck out of these people. What do the people want really? They want this, but if I do this, then this contradicts something else that they also want. And so, and so you end up by saying, let's just vote by party lines. Let's get it done. Get it done. So we need a mechanism in between, which is listening to the public issues, and it then gets thoughtful people willing to think together, say, these are the issues that the public seems to have. Let's have some deliberations amongst ourselves to understand what is going on and what might be 2 or 3 options which could maybe satisfy everybody, some more, some less, but harm nobody. Let's develop those options, those strategies. And these then, if we give to the elected authorized people, we've done the digestion work, which is missing today in society. So the creation of forums for deliberation amongst diverse citizens in a dialogic fashion, not in a debating fashion, are the structures that need to be created. And in Europe, they are creating these. In South America too, in Brazil, they're creating these. There are these experiments, if you will, going on to say, this is the structural solution. Now let's create these. We can't let go the constitutional system. Otherwise, as you would say, this is, someone has taken charge, a constitution, which we agreed to said they couldn't do it. So we have to create this alternative or the supporting structures before we let go our over-reliance on the multi-party electoral system. So that's why my last point was about listening. I really do think that this is the missing quality. Even in debates, we are taught in college and school how to, win the argument. Shashi Tharoor can win any argument. He has the power of the gift of the gab. But that's an Oxford debate. It's not just listening to someone who can't speak as well as you, but he has a feeling, she has a feeling. Just listen. Let them speak in their uneducated voices, if you want to call them that. Just let's listen. Let's listen. So this quality of listening in these forums, which must be diverse, will enable societies to start patching itself up and for the constitutional power to get good options, good strategies.
I will ask Ranjan Panji to raise his question. He has written in the chat box. I will request him to unmute and share his question and comment.
I must thank Mr. Maira for a very, what I call a nice feel-good talk from a former Boston consulting employee. I was taken aback and very pleasantly by identification of 1991, by his identification of 1991 opening up of economy led by the World Bank and IMF cohorts. And I wish the speaker could also suggest a corrective roadmap, although it's not as easy as one could think of. Much is made of lack of democracy in China. The apologists of the slow pace of development in India keep on parading the virtues of democracy here. But doesn't it hide the fact that there is much better awareness of grassroots concerns through associate party units set up at all levels as compared to what prevails here in the so-called democratic setup? I live in a village in Uttarakhand, and I see how a state which was carved out of UP has imported all the kind of evil effects of the democracy in UP in a smaller state where the demographic complexion and other things are so different. And there is such a miscarriage of democracy, if I can use the word, in the developmental map of Uttarakhand. Thank you.
Yeah, as a scientist, myself, a little part of me is a scientist. I always become curious that if something is not working, why is it not working? And then looking around to say, if what I want to do, someone else seems to be doing better, why don't I understand how they do it? So when I was invited by Dr. Manmohan Singh to join the Planning Commission, and I'm not an economist and never I had never worked in the government either. So I was a bit surprised that he would invite me. And I said this to him. I said, the Planning Commission must have eminent economists or people with a lot of experience in public policy. And why would you have me? So he said, that is why. You are a thinker, you are a physicist and who knows how to, just be dispassionate and just to see, well, exactly is going on without your own ideological bias in it. And here's our country, he said, that, we've got the best economist, including himself and Monte there and so on, and no dearth of it and access to the so-called best economists in Washington. So it's not, that's why I don't want another economists. And I don't want another person from experience in government because clearly we have to change the way we are governing and the way our government is functioning. So I want not that experience and therefore no need to defend it. I want you there. So the point he said was you're not creating enough industry and through industry employment. And you've got a long career with Tata's and then as a consultant to American and European companies and how to build their depth in their own manufacturings. So that is what we want. I want you to concentrate, please, on broadly, what is wrong in the way we are approaching the governance of our own country and our own policies. And keeping in mind that the most salient problem, he said, is that the growth of incomes at the bottom and jobs at the bottom is not growing, and therefore your special subject industry too. And so in that, I came to the Planning Commission. I said, okay, like a good scientist, I want to see, it's a very complex subject, India and its own history. What is India trying to do? India wants to be, like we said, self-reliant, poor country, limited resources, become self-reliant. Has any other country done? And so I asked the World Bank, who was dying to advise us because they're always there. And I said, look, I don't want your advice on specific policies. In any case, on industrial policy, they weren't allowed to advise anybody because the idea of having an industrial policy had been thrown out by the Washington Consensus. No country was allowed to have an industrial policy. You only had to have a trade policy. And so when I said that I've been asked to build industry, one of our chief economic advisors, just retired, came and told me privately, he says, don't make an ass of yourself. Don't say that you're developing an industrial policy. I said, okay, I won't call it industrial policy. I'll call it an employment, income generation policy, if you will. But for that, we'll have to have, more activity, industrial productivity in the country. So I asked the World Bank, I said, look, as any scientist, especially economic and social scientists, you have to do your experiments retrospectively. You have to find examples of two things which were in similar contexts, say 30, 50 years ago, and today their performance has diverged greatly. Then you can study the path of these two and to see which path, works better to achieve the sort of results that we were in a similar context that we could have followed, and maybe we still can take some lessons from that. So please look at all the countries of the world. You have the knowledge of all the countries of the world, but this is my question. They said, well, it's so obvious. You're India, the other country is China. It's your same size. It is also very poor. And as you're pointing out, as your prime minister also said, how come China's GDP is so much larger? How come Chinese industry is 8 or 9 times larger than us? How come they produce 50 times more high-tech goods than we do? Yeah, so I said, I want to understand how China got there and we didn't. get there, though we had smarter people. So I said, look at it through this lens about how Chinese learned, because everybody who is developing is learning to do something they haven't done before. You know, we've never done it before. Our workers haven't done such skilled work before. Our industrialists haven't organized such complex industrial processes before. Our policymakers haven't, led a poor country into faster development before. All of us have to learn. So I said, if you look through the lens of how systems learn, which was my discipline, which I learned and consulted in when I was in the United States for those 10 years, and I came back with that knowledge to India and applied it in my consulting work here too, and for which the Prime Minister invited me to the Planning Commission. I said, through the lens of how the Chinese system has learned, why has it proved to be a faster and a better learner than the Indian system has? Okay. And it's we're starting with a hypothesis that it's a complex, self-adaptive system, means the energy of many people will either can be used to support the change or they will resist it. So the democracy angle, the consultation, the consensus angle is there. So that's the nature of the system. The Chinese system seems to perform better than ours. You have the data of China also. They continue to, get you for their national plans, and they make 5-year plans, the same number as we. So what do you know about not now their policies, which you keep telling us, well, they opened up to trade slower than you or faster than you? Not that. What's going on inside China? How do local systems learn? How does the Communist Party learn to guide this whole system? Like Deng Xiaoping said, feeling the stones under our feet and then guiding the body so it won't slip as it goes forward. And good metaphor. So what's the Communist Party's role in promoting faster learning in themselves and in the system? They love that metaphor. I said, now find me the mechanics. And they found what I think you already said, that actually the Communist Party at the local levels operates very democratically. It must listen to the people. It must make sure that the peasants and the people on the ground don't rebel, because they are used to violent rebellions, which in India we are not, and they fear it. And so they know the only way to avoid it is to make sure the people on the ground feel safe and secure, and that their lives are being fairly improved, not just the rich people's lives. And so you can see in China's history repeatedly, and especially recently, how the rich have been brought down to size, which of course the US doesn't like, or the West doesn't like, because they fear that the same system might apply to their investors there. So this is the Chinese way. It is very much a life should be better for the people. And this is Chinese history. The best king was a king who made sure that the people were satisfied, not the king who won the most wars and organized the biggest armies in defense of China. Maybe the history was such that they didn't have too many foreign marauders. They did have, of course, unlike us, possibly. Okay. Or like the rest of the world is very used to the king, and the king must be the mightiest king who can save us against foreign enemies. I mean, their monarchs more generally were judged by the people. Okay, is there peace during his time? Are the people prosperous during his time? And he's a good monarch. So I'm just putting this thought before you that if you start reading Chinese now, Chinese economists and Chinese people telling us truthfully of what has been going on in their country, as well as Western people who have been following China for the last 30 years and who've been writing about what actually happens in China. Now, these books are out now because, yes, many of us are curious. How come they did it? So I read these books, and I would agree with what you said, that actually the Communist Party operates far more democratically than our political parties do. The internal democracy in their party is much higher. Yes, at the end of it, there has to be a person who says, it is so, we've listened, we've had the discussions, it is so. And a minority or a large enough minority may not agree, so there will be some turmoil within the party and something else will come. But the way always is listening within the party, and the party cadre on the ground is enjoined to listen to the people. as the World Bank pointed out, they have a 360-degree appraisal system for local party functionaries, installed by Ernst & Young, if you will. They get the citizens' feedback and others' feedback. What do you think about this party chap? Is he good for your place or not? So it's a very nicely constructed learning system and a democratic system whose objective is the welfare of the people.
Mohanji
Thank you, Mr.
Saxena,
Maira.
my friend, has raised a question. Mohanji Saxena raised a question. One question to speaker, sir. What is your opinion on narratives driving the decision making and not facts and science-based facts in a way manipulated democratic system? The second question is, what is your prescription for tiding over the tariff and trade war? How India should prepare? Mohanji Saxena, question, please.
Good. Two very different questions, and I want to take on the first one because I did listen to one of your previous discussions, Ravi, and I could see all of you defending, science, and we're getting irrationality within India. And as I've already said to you, I fear that what has destroyed the world is this European Enlightenment version of science, which, well, we have adopted as being the only way to be scientific. You talked about rational and fact-based. Well, what is a fact? And what is the nature of rationality? So as we are looking at, within the United States, for example, well-researched, how is it that people have elected someone like Trump, who everyone can see, just cares for himself, doesn't apply any knowledge of facts, but somehow in the last election too, even Black people, Latino people, poorer people voted for him. There's a connection with feelings, there's a connection with their fears, there's a connection with their emotions. How do you gauge these things? By measuring the facts. How do you represent an emotion as a fact? You don't. And therefore, applying a scientific method to understand a system of human beings, which is what economics try to do, or rational, self-interested little particles. Human beings are not rational. They have a lot of faith, beliefs, comes from their history, it's associated with their identity that makes them who they are. And you can't prove to them by some selected facts that they are wrong. They believe in what they believe because they've experienced it, they sense it, they like it. And don't try to prove they're stupid and faith-based and not scientific by giving them facts which today, no one trusts statistics. So these are all selected by people that these are the important things to measure. But maybe they aren't the most important things to measure to complete in your model. And certainly economists become very mathematical, more mathematical than physicists. They know that if you want to put something into a computer equation, it has to be in quantities, mathematical quantities. So anything which can't be converted into a mathematical quantity doesn't belong in the model. So therefore, people's emotions don't belong. They don't exist. They don't exist. So I'm, again, going to be a little scientific. You people would know Gödel's theorem of incompleteness. He said, all mathematical models are based on an assumption. It's taking something for granted, then gives you the stability. That, okay, let's not contest this. Given that this is so, now let's work out the further details and the calculations in the model, and that's very stable, very consistent. But you never want to go back and cannot go back and test what's outside your model. Outside your model. So we as scientists are unable to examine our own, what led us to think that science is a good thing. The Western version of science is a good thing. What is it? What is it? So I do say that to this point about science and rationality, let's stop and question ourselves. Are we really understanding the system? Perhaps our version of how to know, our model of how to know is incomplete. Now, I got so passionately carried away with this that I have forgotten the second question, which was?
The tariff war and the way out.
Precisely. This comes back to the heart of our strategic view to destiny. See, if we were producing much more in our own country for our own needs, Gandhiji's village idea that within the village or within the district, you produce your cloth, you consume your cloth, yeah, you grow your food, you process your own food, you provide incomes to each other, and you will know that, if you don't buy your neighbor's cloth, then he won't have money to buy your produce. So you become a self-supporting, not that everyone is doing everything, people are doing different things. It's a mini version of a complete socio-economic environmental system. But people are able to relate to each other and see and say, look, I'm harming someone, I'm harming my own river when I do this. So they're able to. So they're able to make sense of their system. That's why I told you mathematically, local system solutions formed by communities. Now, the global version of trade, which started with uh, Ricardo's theories about all nations should produce only what they can do the best and buy the rest from someone else. His example was about, port wine in Portugal and the textiles of Britain. He said the Portuguese have the best climate for port wine. So Britain shouldn't try and produce its wine. Let it buy wines from Portugal. And the Portuguese shouldn't bother about producing clothes and textiles for themselves because we've got, far better machinery which we've developed. So let us produce the cloth and send it to you, and you send us the wines and agricultural products. Now, this same thesis was applied to us, right? Okay. Send us your cotton and we'll convert it into cloth. You had great skills in growing and producing your own cloth. Stop doing it, buy our mass-produced stuff, which grew the strength of Britain's economy and weakened our economy very, very much, very much. So come back to when you talk about free trade, and unfortunately, this free trade idea has been imposed by the West. The Britain, its East India Company, send its boats into China, gunboats, to open up the market for opium because people want opium. Let the citizens have what they want. The emperor said, no, it's bad. It's going to destroy citizens' lives. No, no. Citizens should get what they want, and we are here to give it to them. So open up your markets to opium. And then where did they get the opium? In India, the same East India Company said to our farmers, stop growing the food crops, grow poppies so that we can buy that cash crop from you, process it and sell it to China. So yes, they controlled global trade. But who was the beneficiaries? The merchants, the British merchants, the East India Company, our Indian merchants also. So this is the rise of that class, the trading class. In today's world, I would say that the policies on industry and trade are being made by traders. In the days that I grew up, industrial and trade policy, the economic policy, was determined by people who wanted to build industries, who knew it was a hard journey, who wanted to do it, who were asking the government only for this much, that, until we learn how to produce it well, give us 5 years. During that time, don't let these big chaps with their big machinery, and they will dump stuff on us and kill our native industries and our own ability to grow thereafter. So this is what has brought us to this pass after 1991, that we killed our own growth process. So today, India must first give up that ideology. And this is the struggle I find in India today. It is changing, fortunately, in the last 1 year, where because of the circumstances, we are able to get away with saying, self-reliance, Atmanirbhar, it's loyal to buy in India. It's as patriotic to buy Indian as it is to, take a plane in Operation Sindoor and fight the enemy. I'm glad. I'm glad. I mean, this is Gandhiji. This is myself as I grew up with Tatars. This is the vision which, after 1991, we people were described as, backward, Gandhian, protectionist, socialist. Get on with the modern world. But circumstances are compelling us to rethink. And within the country, there will be the influences of the Western thinkers still within our country in economics and the free trade promoters, because that is the ideology from the West. But the other side has to gather itself. And this is why your discussion, intellectual discussion, is very important. We want to make a good intellectual case for the path for India. And if it doesn't sound like the Washington path or the free trade version path, at the present free trade version path, so be it. It's not good for us. We want to build ourselves.
Meenu Gundevia, can you please unmute yourself and share your question? Read the question by Meenu Gundevia. I wish to thank the speaker for his incisive analysis of the current socio-political economic situation in the world and India's place in it. I'm intrigued by the point he made regarding the importance of listening to the public for different issues. My question is, how can this be implemented, especially in the country like India with a population of more than 1 billion people? What new structures would we need? And I would like to him to link the conclusion of his talk to his opening remarks referring to Gandhi and Tagore.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, I'm going to refer to Tagore right away when I say, listen across your walls. And the other point that I made about science is top-down understanding of complex systems cannot work. I'm saying it cannot work because the reality is there, and the reality cannot be represented in numbers. And the top-down people need to have, things simplified into statistics and numbers, and they think through the numbers. They're understanding real people, and they are not. When I joined the Planning Commission, as I mentioned to you, this was the charter given to me by Dr. Manmohan Singh, that what's wrong in the way we are governing our country. We had it the Constitution. I mean, thereafter said that democracy is government of the people, for the people, and by the people. It's the same definition of any democracy, France or USA. It's of the people means, yes, we need a strong government that will keep the people, contained and safe and of the people. And you can say also of the people in terms of they're elected by the people, so it's a government of the people. Also, this government should work for the people, means that the government should be for the people, not for foreigners. It should be for the people of the country. For them means making sure their welfare is improved. And so we have wanted, therefore we get Garibi Hatao and all, which is a socialist idea, but that's how it should be. A good government has to be, I'm saying, almost by definition, a socialist government. It is for society, it's for the common people. So that's second. The third thing, though, he said it's supposed to be government by the people. Means it's not left to these big scientific and policy makers to decide for the people. The people must themselves govern themselves, which is the Gandhian point. So that's what has to be done. Now, when I joined the Planning Commission, the first thing very clearly was that the Planning Commission was making plans based on statistics and data, 1,000-page plans full of data, statistics. And people were saying, both in the business sector and the social sector, okay, these plans are useless. You write a plan, then you make a review, and you find you didn't get far enough. Then you make yet another plan of the same sorts, covering the same subjects, same method of making the plan, more numbers, more statistical analysis, and we get another big plan in celebration. And our progress is so slow compared to like China, as I mentioned to you before. So what is wrong with this method? So I said, well, obviously, if it's about understanding a complex system in which there are a variety of things going on and a variety of perspective, and it's supposed to be listening to the people, and also they're governing, contributing to the governance. Why don't we listen to the people? They say, 1 billion people, how can you listen to 1 billion people? I said, no, we're not ourselves going to, like social media, getting 1 billion points of view. There are people who are listening to the people, aren't there? They got their social organizations, NGO organizations, business lobbies are there. They're listening to different stakeholders. We must call the representatives of the right variety, diversity of these stakeholder groups, not just listen to the business lobbies or not just listen to the particular NGO lobbies. Let's see, if we represent our country, what are the different sort of stakeholders in this country, and which are the organizations that have been making noises representing them, the Dalits, the tribals, and so on. And let's select 3 or 4 organizations from each of these 15, 20 different constituencies and ask them what they believe are the most important issues for the country, but starting with from the perspective of their own constituencies. And it was quite remarkable that to come to these 15 constituencies and the key 8 or 9 big questions that we had, the Planning Commission had to come up with at least, the way of consultation. The Planning Commission is divided into specializations, so many different departments, and none of those people in the Planning Commission would listen and talk to each other. Each of them are making their plans for their parts. So I said, before we make the next plan, we are going to ask the people of the country through not their elected representatives, but through their people's representatives, their associations, to tell us what is most important and their suggestions. And so that's what we did. It was an exercise we took 3 or 4 months. But the nicest part of the exercise was when we called, for example, giving the example, women's issues. So we called, and there were child issues, different groups. Women's issues, we called the best NGOs, all of whom are very well known with millions of members, thousands of members, very vocal. कि आप हमने साथ चुने हैं 7 organizations, all of you. So please, this is our overall question about the whole system. I mean, there are women's issues, also environmental issues, other issues. If you could please reflect amongst yourselves as women's groups and you come to a consensus about what would be the best for the women of this country, the best form of development of the country for the women of this country. Similarly, you look after children's issues, you 7, 8 organizations. And we said the time is short. So we're requesting you to have your internal dialogue. So you already have the data, all of you. And you say you consult all the time with your people. It's just a matter of you getting on and having your internal dialogue and your internal consensus on what you would say to the Planning Commission that the path for development of the country, like women's issues, should be like this, which we believe would be very good for the women of the country. And similarly for the Dalits, big group said that and so on. So they said, how much time do we have for this? We said 3 months. So then I gave them a timeline. I said, first you will have to go back to your own people with these questions because look, ask the people, don't believe you know. They insisted, they said, do you think we don't know? I said, no, all of us get into that. कि हम उनकी बात बोलते जाते हैं और भूल गए हैं उनका सुनना. You leaders also. So I do want all of you say that you have your sabhas and stuff, to please conduct in the next 1.5 months another sabha of yours into which you put these questions. After getting from your own sabhas, you talk amongst yourselves so that you get the next month to come to a consensus. You know what they said? They said, Mr. Maira, what world do you live in? This was not the women's groups. Do you think women leaders can ever agree with each other? You're going to have to make sense. We are going to tell you what our different perspectives are. 7 NGOs of women will tell you their views, 10 of children, 10 of Dalits. You make sense of this. I said, no, I'm sorry. You can't put this hard work onto us. If all of you say, women's groups, that you understand the women of this country, right? First, listen, have you amongst yourselves really understood? And do you have a consensus amongst yourselves? So they did come up with something. It wasn't perfect. When we then had a review later with them about was this process with them useful, they said, the outcome that came wasn't obviously very good because they couldn't come to their consensus. And we were unwilling, actually, the Planning Commission yet to listen to the people. We had our statistics and that overruled what came from these groups. But they said the most important thing that we learned was that we weren't listening even to each other. We claim, each of us, that I represent the women of this country. And she claims the same. I don't listen to her point of view. I'm contesting her. And this is the political problem. We want to be known as the people's representative on that issue. Dekha?
Rosa Ramni has a question. Sir, what is the program that you suggest to raise the income of lower income groups?
The lower income groups are a variety of groups. I mean, there are people who make their money, earn their income by, cultivating something on the land. There are people who don't own any such property. They got to work in a sort of manufacturing type or a service enterprise. Okay. How will their incomes grow? Their incomes will grow if they are heard in their own organizations. Their voices must be heard. The problem that has come, I'm saying across the world, and it's in our country even now, that we hate unions. labor unions, because small people can't have power alone unless they are allowed to and encouraged to come into a legal, well-run union. You can't hear the workers' needs at all. So by insisting that workers should not be allowed to unionize because they will resist the policies which are in favor of capital, and that will be therefore a hindrance to the growth of the economy. We are actually killing the roots of the economy and the incomes of our own people. Similarly, these farmers, as they came out in the country 2 or 3 years ago, the unions that came across and said, yes, you experts have decided all of this. You got the parliament also, or the cabinet, to agree on reforms which are supposed to be good for us. But you never heard the farmers themselves, the poor farmers, the varieties from the Karnataka, Punjab, vagara. So that's how they came, and they stopped at the gates of Delhi and said, we want to be heard by the parliament. And look what happened. They said they'll be Gadar if we listen to these people. We stopped them. So here we are a country, we don't want to listen to the people who are going to tell us really, and they're good solutions. Our farmers know what is the best solution in their own topography, in their own place. So that's one, listening. Second is organizing themselves into cooperatives for production, where the wealth must be created for the people who actually produce the wealth. If the workers in any enterprise are doing their work efficiently and they're paid fair wages maybe, but the surplus, which is the profit, the capital that is generated, goes to investors who could be in America or through the stock exchange anywhere, the workers are not getting any wealth here. And wealth gives you power, it gives you freedom. So the design of new forms of enterprises, which are not the corporate form, the limited liability corporate form, is the form which is considered universally the only way to run an economy. And the East India Company was the first of these, and it is the most selfish enterprise that you can create. It is an enterprise which is created by law to look after the interest only of its investors, to produce profits for them. It has limited liability if in the process of producing profit for its investors, it harms the environment or society. It has only limited liability for those consequences. East India Company, and you know what it destroyed, the whole country. And this same model, however, has persisted. Whereas cooperatives owned by the workers, like we got the example of Amul or a few others, those, and they sound very Gandhian, but there's a logic and economic logic to it. Yes, where the surplus is produced in the hands of the workers themselves. This again is the contrast with the communist model, where the workers, yes, do produce a surplus for society, but that is not their own wealth. It is then some bureaucrat decision maker will decide what to do for the sake of the whole, defense, research, or whatever, with that capital surplus that's generated by the work of the people. So cooperative forms of enterprise, in communities, more family forms of working together rather than factory forms of organizing ourselves. In a family, we do things for each other, but we don't expect to be paid in money, nor do we expect immediate returns. It's from each according to their ability at that time, to each according to their need at that time. This is how families work. There's a lot of trade and exchange going on of a variety of things in them. Whereas in a factory form, the human beings are taken out of families, mothers out of families, and put as workers into the factory where they ignore their own family. And so the health of families are suffering. Children are getting mental problems. And then you say, well, let's create childcare centers run like factories where you pay people to look after them. So this is not economically sustainable. Where's the money going to come to pay for all the social welfare needs that are arising for our workers and factory workers? Because you're pulling people out of family and community to perform their roles there into performing economic roles within factory-like organizations. I think we'll have to take one more last one.
Last question. Last question. Mr. Ramurthy Sharma wants to know, Speaker, sir, don't you think that irrational hate and belief will create the system of might is right or unprecedented anarchy. If we depend on faith and belief, how can we develop the collective interest? Should fact not lead to distinction between just and unjust belief? And above all, if we depend on faith and belief, what will be the distinction between humans and other beings? Mr. Ramurthy Sharma.
The distinction between humans and artificial intelligence is that artificial intelligence has no faith, it has no belief. It is a mathematical self-learning calculation through algorithms, through models. So first I want to make that distinction, that one thing that human beings and all animals, all on organic means of this earth have, they have faith, not just rational calculation for taking their decisions. So we human beings have been losing our ability to be human when we say we shouldn't have faith which cannot be rationally proven by facts. So we got to come back to understanding why in political societies, our own, in the United States and Europe, why is it that people are not convinced by scientists and by rational policymakers about what is good for them? And so these studies done by cultural sociologists in Chicago, they've done their studies mostly out of research here in India, which is a democracy with politics, but still remains a largely faith-based society. On what basis do people in Odisha, famous examples, longitudinal research, make their decisions? Similarly, in other parts of the country, and then this model of research has been applied elsewhere, including in the United States, and found that there are 5 bases for one's decision making, moral decision making, ethical decision making. 2 of them are the one about do unto others as you would have done unto yourself. Okay, and the other one is also about preferably not being violent to others. This, whether you are a liberal, rational liberal, or you are a Gandhian faith-based person, you believe in these principles. Every religion says so, except that there are other things that people, as you say, in societies and people who are more faith-based and spiritual people, like myself, I'm not in that sense religious or particular religion. I do believe there's a wonder in the system, and that in my mind inside, I cannot know the outside completely, nor from the outside can I step into the outside to know what the outside thinks of me. And this was a fallacy in Einstein's theory of relativity, where Gödel proved mathematically that Einstein had presumed, pure rational, I said God doesn't play dice. Now, there won't be time to answer that. But if you physicists are interested to, the lessons that physicists have learned about science and rationality and faith. And I feel a bit surprised sometimes amongst physicists who are still stuck in their own version of what physics is, and they're specialists in that version and world famous, that physics itself has been questioning its grounds, its way of knowing. So there's a commonality here between philosophy and physics, and that's where I belong, and poetry.
Yeah. So, so we are moving to the conclusion of this meeting. Thank you very much for this thought-provoking presentation. I had 3 takeaways from this meeting: learning, listening, and trying to break new grounds. That are the 3 takeaways for me. And definitely, thank you very much to all participants for joining this meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, everybody. Thank you very, very much.